If I say the word influencers to you, do you get the same negative mind view that I do? So I'm thinking right now, young, beautiful people living their entire fake lives on Instagram, taking photos of every meal out that they have. They're looking for the perfect sunset shot and just generally being really annoying. Have I just revealed something about myself there? I think I probably have. But here's the thing. Actually, to be an influencer is a smart marketing tactic. And I don't mean the whole Instagram dinner thing, but what if you were influencing business owners in your marketplace about using technology to grow their business? What if you were showing them how important cybersecurity is and why they should protect themselves in specific ways? My special guest today is an expert at helping businesses like yours to use influencers to influence an audience. And she's going to tell you how any MSP can either be an influencer or use other influencers to drive new revenue in your marketplace.
Hi, I'm Sarah Safari, and I run Influencer Nexus, where we match brands with influencers.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, Sarah. And I don't think we've ever talked about influencers in this podcast before, because when I think about influencers, I think about, people on Instagram holding up the phone, looking at it, going out to places and not enjoying the meal, but taking photos of the meal and all of that kind of stuff. And I always, I'm 51. I roll my eyes at that kind of stuff and I think, oh, come on, it's just ridiculous. And yet, actually, from getting to know you a little bit and talking to you about what an influencer is, I realized that actually an influencer is just someone who influences someone else to go in a certain direction, to pick certain businesses. And actually that's something that MSPs can benefit from as well. So we are going to be talking about B2B influencers right now and how MSPs can kind of take a little bit of that Instagram effect and apply it into their market and LinkedIn and bring a little bit of the influencer magic to their marketing. So before we dive into that, just tell us a little bit about you. So how do you become the person who advises businesses how to use influencers to sell more stuff?
I mean, first off, Paul, whether you like it or not, you are an influencer and you are a B2B influencer.
That's true.
So
that's very true.
The image that you have of them is very different from what you are, but that's exactly what you are. So it's a very good example. I mean, like you mentioned, podcast is one of them on the B2B side. LinkedIn is one of them. Blogging is one of them. So there are different aspects. The best way to think of it is, where are your ideal clients? Where do they sit? And Twitter could be one of them, So those are usually the main platforms on the B2B side of things. So we're not thinking stories. We're not thinking Instagram. We're certainly not thinking of TikTok on this side of things. Can you remind me again what the main question was to kind of like how we got into this in the first place?
Yeah, so it was really about you. How did you become someone who helps brands and businesses to find influencers and promote themselves with influencers?
Honestly, it was, I feel like sometimes things just do happen accidentally, and it was very accidental in the sense of when one door opens, then you kind of go through that and you get to the next phase and the next door opens. And it was a little bit of that, just to give you some background. What we started off doing was, before this, we were consulting influencers. So consulting influencers and influencer wannabes on how to go ahead and grow their business, do copywriting, do sales, be able to drive traffic to their organizations, and just different aspects of their company so they can bring in leads, nurture those leads, turn them into clients, and then keep them long term. That eventually, after 4 or 5 years, was what eventually transitioned to us being essentially the middle person between the brand that wants to do influencer marketing and the influencer that wants to work with different brands across collaborations.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And obviously influencers weren't really a thing 10 years ago, as in the word wasn't used, but people have always, fronted businesses, haven't they? You go back to the 1970s and the 1980s, you've got celebrities wearing watches and wearing jewelry and having perfume and appearing in the ads. So what is it that's happened over the last 10 years that's allowed relatively ordinary people to kind of do that on behalf of companies? Is it because the distribution networks are now easy, so anybody can build a following on any platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of them for sure. I think the platforms have become more important in the transition of this entire thing. So LinkedIn has grown over time. Instagram has grown over time. The B2C platforms have also grown over this period of time. And then I think brands saw an opportunity because originally it was a little bit of a test. Like you mentioned, what the original picture that you currently have of it is what the same image that brands had of it 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so I think that has slowly changed through testing, through dabbling into the market. And over time, it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it's also kind of skyrocketed more so in the last 5 years, so to speak. And so a lot of it is really anyone has opportunity to go out there, start posting content on a regular basis, and all of a sudden become a LinkedIn influencer, a Twitter influencer, an Instagram influencer. Is it easy? No, but there is kind of a method to the madness and a little bit of luck mixed in there to kind of get yourself to that other side. It just really depends on what the goal is and what you're trying to drive. So a lot of the influencers that we work with, one of their biggest things is oftentimes they want to have their own brand, but they also really want to partner with brands that are applicable to their own personal brand, things that they talk about and that they think they can support other brands with, helps with the revenue source. On the brand side, it's supporting them with being able to hit their KPIs, whether it's a CPM model, whether it's driving traffic, whether it's conversions, whatever that might be, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So if we look at that from the point of view of let's say, an average MSP, and we'll pick Chicago, which I know is one of the cities that you've got an office in, and you're an MSP in Chicago, and you want to reach business owners, so ordinary business owners, veterinarians, dentists, manufacturers, lawyers, all of those and more. I guess the first part would be figuring out who is already talking to those people. So, because those people are being influenced by someone, and it might be experts in their vertical, or it might be, is there someone in the Chicago area that's got a podcast, or someone that's big on LinkedIn and, is connected? I mean, I live in a small city in the UK, and there's a guy here, I won't name him, but there's a guy here who's connected to almost every business owner, and he's really well known through networking. He's actually really annoying, but the point is he's really influential. And so if he's talking about your business, there's an element of trust that he transfers over to the person he's talking to. So at its most basic, is that how an MSP could use influencer marketing? Find other people who are already talking to the clients you want to talk to.
Yes, I mean, exactly that. And then find the platforms for which they're already doing that on, right? So like, what's going to be the best form for you? What are you the most comfortable with? And how does your ideal client consume information? And how do you best give information? So for example, if you're uncomfortable going on a podcast, let's kind of take a step back. Maybe you're better being a guest blogger on a significant podcast where veterinarians, where dentists, where your ideal client kind of hangs out. So that would be the first thing that I would think about in terms of going. Same thing with Twitter, right? So where is your ideal client on Twitter? And then the biggest thing and the biggest difference between B2B influencer marketing and B2C influencer marketing is, while there are paid partnerships on the B2B side, it's a lot more relationship based, in that you can go to a B2C influencer and you can say, hey, we're going to pay you X thousand dollars. These are the deliverables. This is what it looks like. Are you interested in moving forward? You go to a LinkedIn influencer and they have 500,000 followers or more, and you say, I'm going to give you several $1,000s. That's not going to be appealing to them. Oftentimes they're a LinkedIn influencer because they're established to some sense. They have a business of their own. They're respectable amongst a multiple of different things, and they've been, so to speak, in the game for a while. So the approach in and of itself is a little bit different. So the first thing is find out where they're hanging out, find out what platform they're hanging out second, and then 3, find out a way to get in the door and really start building the relationship. Because while, you can say that everybody has a price, the entry point is never going to be, hey, I can pay you this much in order for you to promote me, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's just look at one slightly different angle of that. Do you think MSPs should themselves try to become influencers? So you mentioned there about being a podcast guest. I know a lot of MSPs, their idea of hell is being on a podcast or doing videos. But what do you see? There's a sort of a power of doing that and actually doing it consistently? So
I think the answer of that depends on the MSP. Because, like you just said, if the idea of them being on a podcast is absolute hell, then the idea of being an influencer is going to be even more of hell, right? So it really depends on what it is that is comfortable enough for them. And what I mean by that is like, you can have a path that works, because yes, if an MSP becomes an influencer, if all of their cards are right, if they pick up traffic, if they start getting traction, if they start building their audience over time, of course that's good. Of course that will bring traffic. Of course that will bring awareness. Of course that will make conversions easier. But the question is always, is that the path for you? So if an MSP is listening to this right now and they're thinking, oh God, the idea of being an influencer sounds awful. Why are we talking about this? Let's move to the next thing. It's probably not for you, because it's not going to last long. You're not going to do it for long enough. You're not going to be consistent enough to actually drive the results that are necessary to kind of get yourself over that edge and get to the next step. So kind of going back to the main point, I think it really depends. They need to ask themselves if it's something they'd be willing to do, or if something that sounds absolutely dreadful. And if it sounds dreadful, then and it doesn't matter what kind of a business owner you are, there's absolutely no point in starting in the first place, because consistency is what drives results.
It is. You're absolutely right. And it's interesting, though, as you're saying that, because I think the vast majority of MSPs wouldn't do that, that in itself creates an opportunity. And I've always said this to MSPs, where everyone's doing the same thing. It only takes one person to be a little bit different and they become the standout MSP.
Yes.
And in terms of volume, we've been doing this podcast every single week since November 2019. And we get around about 2,500 listens a week, which doesn't sound a lot, but that's been more than enough to drive growth in our business, in the MSP Marketing Edge. It drives a hell of a lot of other activity. I get all sorts of opportunities that come just from doing this podcast with a relatively small audience. So I think the one beauty of trying, whether you're intending to be a B2B influencer or just it's just what you do, you don't need those 500,000 subscribers that perhaps the B2C, the Instagram influencers need, because I'm sure there's a hierarchy of influencers, from your Kardashians at the top with hundreds of millions of followers to somebody just starting out at the bottom with 100 followers. And I'm sure that the opportunities go up or down accordingly.
Well, that's actually a really good point, because it actually doesn't matter, regardless of whether it's B2C or B2B. It's more so on the quality of the influencers that they actually have. So we can have an influencer that has 2 million followers, and we can have an influencer that has 50,000 followers. There are often, and this is not uncommon, cases where the influencer with 50,000 has a substantially more engaged community than the one who has multiple millions of followers. And this is for many reasons. It happens across B2B and B2C, where they're buying bulk followers, they have engagement groups, they're doing all sorts of different things to be able to boost their engagement, but that means that they're not genuinely influential. They're just trying to find ways to make themselves look influential so that they can drive more traffic on their side of things. So really focusing on having a strong quality of an audience is always going to be better than having quantity. And they are always going to have, from that, a higher percentage of conversion who actually become customers. So if an influencer has 2 million followers and they're promoting you on their channel, and maybe 0.01% of them is slightly interested, that's not going to be good as the one who has 50,000 and 80% of their audience is very dialed in, very niche to everything that you're talking about, and very interested in potentially moving forward, which is what we call purchase intent. So it's an influencer who we actually can analyze on the back end their comment sentiment through thousands of comments, and then from there be like, okay, they have 2-3% purchase intent, which in what we do is very good, meaning that they would be very interested in potentially buying what it is that you're offering.
Yeah, I love that. I guess in hearing the word and using the word influencer so much, we forget that the purpose of the influencer is to be influential and actually to persuade people to ultimately start, in this instance, to start a conversation with an MSP. Sarah, that's been such fantastic information. Thank you so much. I can almost hear the MSPs around the world running out and grabbing cameras and grabbing microphones. I can't, no, but I can certainly see, it would be an unusual and therefore a standout thing to go looking for other influencers in your area, or especially if you're in a vertical. Actually, in every vertical there's someone like me doing something like this, and you can go and get together with those people and be the MSP for that vertical, using that influencer as a person to help you. Just briefly tell us a little bit about your business. What do you do to help businesses, and how can we get in touch with you?
I was just going to add one other thing. The one thing I will add for MSPs who may be the idea when you ask me if they want to be an influencer, what they should do, and they probably ran out the door, is the good news is on the B2B side of things, you don't necessarily need to be video. You don't necessarily need to do any audio. It can be all written content. In fact, a lot of the best performing LinkedIn content and the best performing influencers on LinkedIn have 80 to 90% written content. So if that form of communication is something that's a little bit more comfortable for you, then that's good news, because the channels that you should be on are the channels that support content in that kind of format, so to speak. All right, please, Paul, remind me what that last question was again.
Of course. Just tell us what do you do to help businesses, and what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Okay, so best way what we do to help businesses is go ahead and partner them with influential influencers that are specific to their niche and whose their audience is looking for the services who their partners are providing for them. And the best way to get in touch with me would just be on LinkedIn. It's Sarah with an H, Safari, like you're going on a safari, but 2 F's instead of 1.
For MSPs around the world, the MSP Marketing Podcast with Paul Green.